For 10 years, my heart was a stone. And I don't mean that as a metaphor. It was a physical weight in my chest. A cold, hard lump of bitterness I carried with me from the moment I woke up to the moment I fell into a restless sleep. This stone was a grudge, and I nurtured it. I polished it. I protected it. And eventually, it became the core of who I was. It was a poison I drank every single day, somehow expecting the other person to be the one who suffered. It was my own personal prison, and for the longest time, I actually mistook its walls for safety. This isn't a story about a petty squabble. This is about a wound so deep it completely changed the course of my life, my health, and my spirit. It's about the decade I lost to anger, and the grueling, painful, and ultimately liberating journey I took to escape the most dangerous prison of all, the one I built for myself. This is the story of how I learned that real strength isn't found in holding on, but in the terrifying, powerful act of letting go. Every long war starts with a single shot, and my 10-year war began with a betrayal. It's a story that's both deeply personal and painfully common. It involved someone I trusted completely, a person I had let into the inner circle of my life. The specifics don't really matter. What matters is the feeling it left behind. A profound shattering of trust that left me feeling naive, foolish, and completely exposed. In the immediate aftermath, there was just silence. The shock was a physical thing, a cold wave that started in my stomach and just spread. Then came the fire, a righteous, all-consuming anger. My mind, trying to protect me, went into overdrive. See, when we feel a deep, personal wrong, the brain's emotional command center, the amygdala, activates with incredible force, and mine was screaming. This is what kicks off rumination, that endless, looping movie of the event that plays in your head. I watched that movie 1,000 times, examining every frame, every word, searching for clues I'd missed. Each viewing was a fresh dose of pain, re-traumatizing me and cementing the narrative. I was the victim, and they were the villain. This constant replaying wasn't just in my head, it was my brain trying to solve a problem that had no solution. The part of your brain that detects errors, the anterior cingulate cortex, was working overtime, desperate to figure out what went wrong so it couldn't happen again. The problem is, you can't change the past. So this system, designed to help you learn, instead traps you in a loop of what-ifs and should-haves. I was stuck, replaying a history that could never be rewritten. In those early days, friends and family gave the usual advice. Just let it go. Don't give them the satisfaction. Forgiveness is the answer. But their words felt like a foreign language. Forgive? How could I forgive something that felt so completely unforgivable? In my mind, forgiving meant condoning what they did. It felt like saying, "It's okay," when it absolutely was not. It felt like I was letting them off the hook, while I was the one left bleeding. Forgiveness didn't feel like an option. It felt like a second betrayal, this time committed by me, against myself. And so, I made a choice. It wasn't a loud declaration, just a quiet, stubborn decision I made in the darkest corners of my heart. I chose not to forgive. I chose to hold on. I believed, with every fiber of my being, that my anger was my power. It was my shield. It was the only thing I had left. I didn't know it then, but I had just picked up the stone I would carry for the next 3,650 days. I'd locked the door to my own prison, thinking I was locking the other person out, when really, I was the only one trapped inside. The first few years were the most intense. The anger was a roaring fire that needed constant fuel. Every memory, every reminder, every time someone even said their name, it was just another log on the flames. My internal monologue was a non-stop stream of resentment and self-justification. This is what's known as the grudge cycle, a process that actively disrupts your quality of life with negative feelings and intrusive thoughts. I became an expert at rumination. I wasn't just thinking about the past, I was living in it. And here's a cruel trick of the mind. When you're in a negative emotional state, you tend to remember other negative memories that match that mood. So my anger over the betrayal started attracting other hurts, other disappointments. My life story was slowly rewriting itself into a tragedy, with this one event as the catastrophic centerpiece. This reinforced my sense of moral superiority. I was the one who had been wronged, and that feeling, while isolating, also felt strangely validating. This emotional state started to take a physical toll. I was exhausted all the time. I had tension headaches, my jaw was always clenched, and my sleep was just a battlefield of anxious dreams. This wasn't just in my head. Chronic anger keeps your body in a prolonged state of fight or flight, flooding your system with stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. This state is meant for short-term survival, not long-term living. That constant chemical bath was leading to systemic inflammation, raising my blood pressure, and tanking my immune system. I was getting sick more often, and my body felt old. Bitterness was, quite literally, making me sick. Psychologically, the prison walls were getting higher. I started to see the world through a lens of bitterness. I became cynical. A friend's good news might spark a flicker of jealousy. A stranger's tiny mistake would feel like a huge personal attack. People who are bitter are often quick to blame others and struggle to see the good in their own lives because they're so focused on the wrong that was done to them. My bitterness wasn't about one person anymore. It was becoming a negative filter on my entire reality. It poisoned my relationships. Trusting new people felt impossible. If someone I had trusted that deeply could betray me, then anyone could. I kept people at arm's length, building up walls to protect myself, which of course just led to profound loneliness. Even with my closest friends and family, I could feel a distance growing. They got tired of hearing the same story, of seeing me trapped in the same loop. They wanted to help, but you can't pull someone out of a prison they refuse to leave. The very people who could have been my support system were slowly being pushed away by the toxicity of my own resentment. My bitterness was costing me more and more, and in a vicious cycle, that just made me even more bitter. There's a Buddhist parable about the second arrow. The first arrow is the actual painful thing that happens to you. The betrayal, the loss, the injustice. You can't control that first arrow. But the second arrow is the suffering you inflict on yourself with your reaction, the endless anger, the resentment, the bitterness. For 5 years, I was riddling myself with wounds from that second arrow. The initial hurt was a moment, but I was stretching the pain out over years, keeping the wound fresh by refusing to let it heal. The person who hurt me fired the first arrow, but I was the one holding the bow for the second, third, and thousandth that followed. After years of living in this self-imposed exile, the walls of my prison started to feel less like protection and more like a tomb. There wasn't one big, dramatic moment of revelation. It was more like a slow, dawning horror at what my life had become a series of small, painful moments that started to add up, like cracks in a dam. I remember one afternoon so clearly. I was at a friend's barbecue. It was a perfect summer day, warm sun, kids laughing, the smell of fresh-cut grass. Everyone around me was relaxed, happy, and just there, and I was miserable. I was physically at the party, but my mind was a million miles away, stuck in its usual loop of anger. I was watching other people live their lives from behind a thick pane of glass. The person I held the grudge against wasn't there. They weren't suffering. For all I knew, they were living their life, completely oblivious to the decade-long sentence I was serving in their name. And the reality of it just hit me. I was the only one suffering. The bitterness wasn't a weapon, it was a cage. And I was both the prisoner and the warden. That day, for the first time, I saw the grudge not as power, but as the source of my powerlessness. I was giving the person who hurt me free rent in my head, letting them dictate my quality of life long after they were gone. Another crack appeared when a close family member, after listening to me vent for the 1,000th time, looked at me with such sadness and said, "I miss the person you were before this happened." Those words were gentle, but they landed like a punch to the gut. I looked in the mirror that night and barely recognized myself. The lines around my mouth were set in a permanent frown. My eyes looked dull and tired. I saw a person aged not by time, but by anger. I was becoming a chronically bitter person, and you could see it on my face. The final straw was a health scare. It was nothing life-threatening, but my doctor sat me down after some tests and showed me my elevated markers for chronic stress and inflammation. She kindly but directly walked me through the well-documented links between chronic anger, stress, and physical illness, heart disease, immune problems, everything. As she spoke, I felt a chilling sense of recognition. The resentment was like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. It was right there in that doctor's office that the floor fell out from under me. I had a choice. I could keep going down this path, a path that was visibly destroying my health, my relationships, and my spirit. Or I could try to find another way. The thought of forgiveness was still terrifying. It still felt deeply unfair. But for the very first time, the idea of not forgiving seemed even more terrifying. I finally understood that forgiveness wasn't about the other person at all. It wasn't about absolving them or forgetting what they did. Forgiveness was for me. It was an act of self-preservation. It was the key to my own prison cell, and I was the only one who could turn it. Deciding to forgive and actually forgiving are two completely different things. The decision was a single moment of clarity. The process was a long, messy, and frustrating journey. It was not a straight line. There were days I felt free, followed by days when the anger would come roaring back. But I held on to my new mission. This work was for my own freedom. First, I had to finally, truly, acknowledge the pain. For years, I'd worn my anger like armor because it felt safer than feeling the raw hurt underneath. I had to give myself permission to feel the full depth of the sadness and grief without judging myself for it. I wrote letters to the person who hurt me, letters I never planned to send. I poured out every ugly, angry, painful thought I'd bottled up for a decade. It was excruciating, but it was also a release. You can't heal what you refuse to look at. The second step was making a conscious, daily choice to let go. Forgiveness wasn't a feeling that just magically showed up. It was an intention I had to set every single morning. When the old, angry thought loops would start, I'd stop and say to myself, out loud if I had to, "I'm willing to practice forgiveness." This is not my story anymore. This is basically a form of neuroplasticity. You're actively rewiring your brain. By consciously choosing a new response, I was slowly weakening the old, automatic pathways of anger and building new ones for peace. Mindfulness became my most powerful tool. For years, my thoughts had controlled me. Mindfulness taught me to observe my thoughts without becoming them. When a wave of anger would rise, instead of being swept away, I learned to watch it like a cloud passing in the sky. I'd label it, "This is anger. This is resentment." Just acknowledging the emotion without immediately acting on it created a tiny bit of space. And in that space, I had a choice. A huge part of this was shifting my perspective from victim to survivor. I had to stop telling myself the story of what was done to me and start writing the story of what I would do with what happened. I started to actively look for the lessons. The experience, as awful as it was, had taught me about boundaries. It had shown me my own resilience. I started to reframe the ordeal not as a life sentence, but as a challenge that had the potential to make me emotionally stronger. And crucially, I had to understand that forgiveness does not equal reconciliation. This was a game changer. I realized I could forgive someone completely and still choose not to have them in my life. Forgiveness is an internal process of letting go of your bitterness. It has nothing to do with the other person's apology or remorse. I was doing it for me. A huge weight was lifted once I separated the two, that I could forgive the debt of resentment while still protecting my own heart. Forgiveness finally became a safe thing to do. Finally, I leaned on support. I talked to a therapist who gave me a safe space to process my feelings and provided tools I couldn't have found on my own. I also opened up to a trusted friend, not to complain, but to share my struggle and my goal to heal. Just talking about it and knowing someone was in my corner made me feel less alone. This journey wasn't easy. It required confronting the ugliest parts of my pain. But with each step, with each conscious choice to let go, the stone in my chest felt a little lighter. The prison walls started to dissolve, not into dust, but into open air. If this story resonates with you, if you feel the weight of your own grudge, I want you to know you're not alone. I invite you to share in the comments not the details of the grudge, but the feeling of being trapped. Let's create a space where we can acknowledge this shared struggle without judgment. It's the first step toward freedom. And if you're on a journey to break free and want to learn more, please consider subscribing. Today, my life is unrecognizable from what it was during that decade of darkness. The absence of the grudge isn't a void. It's a space that has been filled with peace. The energy I once spent fueling my anger is now channeled into my passions, my relationships, and my own well-being. I can feel joy without that bitter aftertaste of resentment. I can trust again more wisely this time, but with an open heart. Letting go of that 10-year grudge was the hardest thing I have ever done. It was also the most profound act of self-love I have ever committed. It taught me that real power isn't in holding on to anger, which only keeps you chained to the past. True power lies in the courage to forgive. Forgiveness doesn't erase what happened, but it does free you to embrace your present and your future. It doesn't change the past, but it transforms your relationship to it. I didn't just escape a prison. I discovered a strength I never knew I had. I learned that I hold the key to my own freedom. I always have, and so do you.